There is an unspoken law in history that no empire has ever escaped, a seven-stage cycle, one that has crushed every superpower that ever dominated humanity, from Rome to Britain, from the Soviet Union to the United States of America today. It is called the seven-stage empire decline pattern. It begins with overextension, when power spreads faster than the ability to sustain it. Next comes currency debasement, then the debt spiral, the exhaustion of production, social decay, the loss of global currency status, and finally collapse. Rome once thought it was eternal. They built temples to the gods and called their city Immortal. Britain believed the sun would never set on their empire. The Soviet Union imagined history had ended under their banner, and all were wrong. Every empire in every era saw the warning signs, but they believed they were different, that technology, military might, or national faith would spare them from fate. None succeeded. History doesn't care about beliefs. It only cares about mathematics, and the math of empires always follows the same graph. Growth, expansion, debt, then collapse. Right now, America is in stage 4. Still powerful, still confident, but the foundations are starting to crack. Production, weakening, trade deficits ballooning, and a society increasingly losing faith in itself. If you understand this law, you will see clearly we are not outside history. We are living in the middle of it. And if you understand that pattern, you will know exactly where we are on the curve of decline. No empire collapses overnight, and it doesn't need a strong enough enemy to destroy it. They all die the same way from the inside. The fall of an empire rarely begins with the sound of gunfire. It usually starts in the numbers: ballooning budget deficits, escalating imperial costs, shrinking revenues, a bloated administrative system that consumes resources without generating productivity. When power stretches too far, the costs of defending borders, maintaining bases, subsidizing allies exceed what can be afforded. That is overextension, the first seed of disease. Cash flow runs dry. The state borrows when the debt can't be repaid. Interest piles on interest. The treasury becomes a machine that exists only to pay interest. To prolong the illusion of prosperity, they debase the currency, printing more money, changing the standard, cleverly giving new names to the same behavior, delaying the reckoning. But money only has value as long as there is trust. Once businesses hoard hard assets, citizens flee to foreign currencies, investors demand higher interest, trust begins to crumble. Trust cracks first, then institutions. Laws are bent for short-term gain, taxes rise but can't be collected, public investment floods but efficiency collapses, corruption and privilege erode legitimacy. At the same time, productive capacity gradually declines, factories leave, supply chains depend on outsiders, technology slows. The elite take their capital and knowledge abroad, while those who remain grow disillusioned, skeptical, withdrawn. Society shifts from cohesion to polarization. Politics shifts from solutions to performance. Slogans replace action. No need for cavalry at the borders, just time and the compound interest of mistakes. The empire still wears the cloak of strength, but inside it is hollow. The military lacks logistics, the currency lacks trust, the law lacks authority. At the tipping point, a small shock, a credit crisis, a capital flight, an energy crisis, is enough to bring the entire structure crashing down like a house of cards. As the saying goes, defying every illusion, empires don't fall when they're defeated, they fall when they exhaust themselves. To understand how that mechanism works, let's see how it begins, from the empire that thought it would last forever. From a small city on the banks of the Tiber River, Rome rose to become the greatest empire in the ancient world. For over a millennium, they conquered, built, ruled, and considered themselves immortal. From Caesar to Nero, Rome dominated everything, from the Syrian deserts to the Germanic forests, from the Sahara Desert to the shores of the Atlantic Ocean. They called themselves the Eternal Empire, and they believed it. But even in their most glorious era, the first cracks appeared. And from there, the pattern of the 7 stages of collapse was born. Stage 1. Military overextension. As the empire expanded across 3 continents, borders stretching thousands of miles became an unsustainable burden. Every new territory required garrisons, supply roads, food, and gold. Every rebellion, every campaign of expansion, drained the treasury. The Roman army didn't just fight. They occupied, built, and consumed endlessly. The price of greatness was the cost of itself. Stage 2. Currency debasement. When the treasury ran dry, emperors began cheating with the money. The denarius, once minted in pure silver, was mixed with copper. The silver ratio gradually fell, 90%, then 70%, then 50%, until it was a mere 5%. People still saw the emperor's face on the coin, but the real value had vanished. Food prices rose many times over, soldiers demanded higher pay, merchants no longer trusted Roman silver. Inflation spread across the empire like a disease eroding trust. Stage 3. Debt spiral. When the currency lost value, the state borrowed at any cost. Taxes were raised to record levels, levied on land, livestock, even children. Farmers mortgaged their fields, then became tenants on land that was once theirs. The government spent on grand projects, monuments, arenas, festivals, to maintain the illusion of glory amid growing exhaustion. The treasury became a black hole, revenue couldn't cover expenses, debt piled on debt, and faith in the state was eroded year by year. Stage 4. Loss of productive capacity. As the economy was squeezed, Rome stopped producing. They relied on slaves from conquered regions, cheap labor with no creativity, no motivation. When the war stopped, the slave supply dried up, and the economy suddenly stopped breathing. Metal workshops closed, farms were abandoned, trade stagnated. The empire that was once the center of technology and industry now had to import wheat from Egypt, cloth from Gaul, spices from India, but no longer had enough gold to pay. Prosperity became an illusion. Stage 5. Social decay. As the economy declined, society rotted. Roman citizens no longer believed in res publica, the republican ideal that had built the city. They avoided military service, evaded taxes, sought pleasure in wine, parties, and gladiatorial games. The government tried to maintain order with bread and circuses, trading faith for numbness. The elite drowned in luxury, while the poor lived on handouts. The cohesion that once made Rome strong was replaced by indifference and fear. Stage 6-7. Invasion and collapse. As Rome weakened, those who once feared them began to advance. The Goths, the Vandals, the Huns, once distant borders, now flooded the heart of the empire. They didn't just bring swords, they brought the end. In 410, Rome was sacked for the first time in 800 years. 2 centuries later, the Western Empire officially vanished, leaving only crumbling stones in the memory of a civilization that thought it was immortal. Rome thought it was eternal. It became a ruined tourist's visit, and from that the world had its first lesson in how a superpower truly dies, not from being defeated, but from burning itself out. A few centuries after Rome faded, another empire rose from a small island off the coast of Europe. Britain, the unofficial heir to Rome, believed it had found a way to maintain power forever. Through industry, trade, and warships, they built the largest empire in human history. At its peak, Britain ruled a quarter of the planet, over 400 million people, from India, Africa to the Caribbean and the Pacific. The sun never sets on the British Empire was not just a boast, it was a religious conviction, but just like Rome, that glow concealed spreading cracks. Stage 1. Military overreach. To rule a quarter of the world, the British paid with their own treasury. The world's largest navy, armies stationed across 6 continents, bases, fleets, administration, a global trade network, all consumed enormous amounts of gold. When World War I broke out in 1914, London faced a choice: stay out and preserve the empire, or fight to defend civilization. They chose war, and in just 4 years, Britain spent over $40 billion, equivalent to trillions today. Public debt far exceeded GDP. Millions died, and their financial position crumbled. They won the war, but the cost was the ability to pay for the empire they had built. Stage 2. Currency debasement. To sustain the war, Britain shipped gold to America in exchange for weapons and food. When the war ended, the national gold reserves were half gone. Yet they stubbornly returned the pound to the old gold standard in 1925 to prove the empire is still strong. The result was exports becoming too expensive, widespread unemployment, and economic depression. By 1931, they were forced to abandon the gold standard. The pound lost 25% of its value overnight. The currency of the empire suddenly became a burden. Stage 3. Debt spiral. Learning no lesson, Britain plunged into World War II with empty pockets. Once again, they borrowed from America to survive. The Lend-Lease program saved Britain, but turned them into a debtor. When the war ended, they won, but at the cost of their entire superpower status. By 1945, Britain's debt to the US and Canada exceeded $30 billion, more than the nation's GDP. The treasury was empty, the pound weak, and for the first time in centuries, London was no longer the world's financial center. Stage 4. Loss of empire. Unable to sustain the empire without money, they began to withdraw. 1947. Lost India, the jewel in the crown. Then Egypt, Kenya, Singapore, Hong Kong. In 2 decades, the empire's map was erased. When the Union Jack was lowered in New Delhi, it was not just a political ceremony, it was the funeral of 2 centuries of power. At the same time, the people at home were exhausted, factories deteriorated, food had to be imported. The empire was gone, but the massive bureaucracy and military still existed, draining the remaining resources. Stage 5. Social fatigue. British society entered a period of lethargy. From the belief that God gave us the right to rule the world, the British became a weary nation, nostalgic for the past. Workers struck, youth left the old colonies for new opportunities, and the elite clung to memories of the Golden Age. In the 20th century, as America rose, Britain accepted the role of junior partner, the aging elder brother in the New World Order. They still had the throne, still had symbols, still had London, but no longer an empire. The empire where the sun never set finally saw the sunset. And once again, the law repeated: war, debt, loss of currency, loss of faith, then loss of the world. All that remained was nostalgia and legacy, and a warning to every great power that believes its dominance is eternal. The superpower vanished in just 900 days. No atomic bombs, no invasion, only silent exhaustion from within. That is the story of the Soviet Union, the last empire of the 20th century that believed military might could defy the mathematics of reality. After World War II, the Soviet Union emerged from the ashes with absolute faith that they were humanity's future. They had nuclear weapons, satellites orbiting Earth, more than half of Europe under their influence. They believed communism would bury capitalism, but behind the dazzling parades on Red Square, the economy was already rotting. Stage 1. Military overextension. To maintain parity with the US, the Soviet Union poured 15 to 20% of GDP into the military, 3 times their rival. They had to sustain millions of troops in Eastern Europe, fund allied regimes in Cuba, Vietnam, Angola, Afghanistan. Every front was a new debt. Every ally a leak in the treasury. When the Afghanistan war erupted in 1979, Moscow bogged down in an unwinnable war of attrition. It was the Soviet version of Vietnam. Bleeding money, manpower, and morale. Stage 2. Economic stagnation. While spending on the military, the domestic economy was neglected. Factories mass-produced steel, tanks, and planes nobody needed, while people queued for hours to buy bread and soap. Agriculture failed. Technology lagged. Innovation was stifled by bureaucracy. Outside, they launched spacecraft. Inside, they couldn't feed their people. By the 1980s, a country owning 1/6 of the world's land had to import food from the West. Stage 3. Currency collapse. The ruble, the people's currency, was not convertible, trusted by no one. Even Soviet citizens hoarded dollars when they could, because they knew the ruble had value only on paper. When oil prices, the Soviet Union's main revenue, plummeted in the mid-1980s, gold reserves quickly dried up. The government sold gold, printed more money, and even paid debts with crude oil. They no longer had real money to buy real goods. Faith in the financial system vanished, along with the ability to sustain the empire. Stage 4. 5. Loss of satellites and collapse. Once the economy crumbled, control over Eastern Europe began to crack. In 1989, the Berlin Wall fell, followed by a series of satellite states breaking away: Poland, Hungary, Czechoslovakia, Romania. Regimes that had sworn loyalty to Moscow turned their backs in months. The Soviet Union could not intervene, not for lack of weapons, but for lack of money and will. By 1991, when internal republics began declaring independence, the empire officially dissolved. No invading army, no nuclear explosion, just an exhausted economy and a system that no longer believed in itself. On December 26, 1991, the hammer and sickle flag was lowered from the Kremlin. The empire that challenged the West vanished quietly, leaving only concrete buildings, rusting missile silos, and the memory of an absolute faith betrayed. No invasion, no bomb, just math and exhaustion. And then, it was America's turn. The youngest, richest, and most confident empire in human history. A superpower that once saved the world from fascism, conquered space, and shaped the global order after the war, now walking exactly the same path that Rome, Britain, and the Soviet Union trod. Not speculation, but measurable reality in numbers. Stage 1. Military overreach. The United States currently maintains over 750 military bases in 80 countries, with a presence in more than 150 territories. The 2025 defense budget reaches $895 billion, more than the next 10 countries combined. 1/3 of federal spending now goes to the military, security, and intelligence. Every conflict, whether in the Middle East, Eastern Europe, or the Pacific, is framed as for global stability, but in reality it is a chain of obligations that cannot be stopped. But Washington must defend NATO and Europe, guarantee security for Japan and South Korea, support Taiwan, intervene in the Middle East, counter China, monitor Iran and Russia simultaneously. It is no longer strategy. It is the habit of an empire that cannot admit it is overloaded. Stage 2. Currency debasement. From 2020 to now, the United States has printed over $6 trillion to cope with the pandemic, bail out businesses, and sustain consumption. The result was the largest inflation in 40 years, peaking at 9% in 2022, now hovering at 3–4%. But the cost of living, housing, healthcare, and education has risen higher than ever. Since abandoning the gold standard in 1971, the USD has lost over 98% of its purchasing power. America no longer mixes copper into silver like ancient Rome. It just presses a button on the money printer. Different mechanism, same consequence. Stage 3. Debt spiral. In 2025, U.S. public debt hits $37 trillion, equivalent to 122% of GDP. Each year, the government spends about $1.1 trillion just on interest, more than the defense budget. And that number keeps rising. For every dollar of tax revenue, more than 20 cents immediately goes to paying old debt. Congress argues over the debt ceiling, but there has never been a surplus budget. This empire does not borrow to build the future, but to delay the bill from the past. Borrowing to pay interest on previous borrowing, that is exactly the spiral that dragged Spain and Britain into the abyss. Stage 4. Loss of productive capacity. This is where we stand. Made in America was once a source of pride, now a nostalgic slogan. Nearly 70% of U.S. consumer goods are imported, 90% of semiconductors, the heart of all technology, come from Asia. Manufacturing was efficiently outsourced abroad, in exchange for short-term profits and cheap goods. The result is fragile supply chains. When COVID-19 paralyzed the world, America realized it couldn't produce enough masks or antibiotics. When trade wars erupted, prices soared, factories closed, and people first understood that dependency is a hidden enemy. The industrial cities of the Midwest, Detroit, Cleveland, Pittsburgh, once symbols of productivity, now just memories. The new generation of workers grew up in a service, finance, and social media economy, where profits come from transactions, not production. That is the fourth stage of the collapse cycle, when an empire stops creating real value and lives only on illusory value. And the social signs are reflecting that. Americans are losing faith in institutions. Politics is polarized to the point of paralysis. Elections have become wars of belief. The younger generation no longer believes in the American dream. They believe in technology, but not in the future. The number of people who believe their children will live better than them has fallen to the lowest level since 1930. Yet amid that grim landscape, there is still a ray of hope. America remains the world's center of technological innovation, artificial intelligence, renewable energy, biomedicine, aerospace, all still emerging from Silicon Valley, Boston, and Texas. The creative resources have not vanished, but they are being constrained by debt, bureaucracy, and internal division. If any nation can reverse the cycle, it is the United States, but only if they realize that true strength lies not in the defense budget, but in the ability to build itself, repair itself, and trust one another. We're at stage 4, not doomed yet, but the window is closing. Every empire in history at its most glorious moment believed it was the exception. Rome believed God was on their side. Britain believed their civilization was the model for all humanity. The Soviet Union believed they represented the future of history. And now America believes democracy and technology make it invincible. But the mathematics of history doesn't care about beliefs. Every superpower falls for the same illusion, that the natural laws, debt, productivity, trust, can be bent by political will or technological miracles. They always tell themselves, we're different. That is imperial psychology, the most dangerous disease of power, the first illusion. We have technology. The Romans once boasted of their roads, aqueducts, irrigation. Britain believed in steamships, telegraphs, industrialization. The Soviets bragged about spacecraft and nuclear bombs, and America believes artificial intelligence and the internet will free them from material limits. But technology only amplifies the nature of a society. If the society is healthy, it accelerates growth. If it's rotting, it only speeds up decline. Machines cannot replace morality, and technical progress cannot patch holes in trust. The second illusion. We have money. Every empire that held the world's strongest currency believed they could spend without limit. Rome had Spanish silver, Britain had colonial gold, America has the dollar, but currency is not real wealth. It is a promise backed by trust. When debt exceeds the ability to create value, the currency loses its soul. Empires don't go bankrupt for lack of money, but for lack of people willing to buy bonds, hold gold, or entrust their future. The third illusion. We are democracy. Americans believe democracy is a shield against collapse. But democracy is not immune to material laws. When people lose faith in institutions, when every election becomes a factional war, when government spends to buy votes rather than invest, democracy is just paint over the cracks. Democracies can self-destruct without dictatorship, just deficit, division, and fear. And that's when mathematics steps in. History is not driven by will or ideals, but by cold equations. Spend more than you earn, print faster than you produce, consume more than you create. No ideology escapes this law. Whether communist, monarchist, or capitalist, when productivity stops growing and trust ceases to exist, the collapse cycle begins. The pattern doesn't care about flags, languages, or constitutions. It only cares about arithmetic. And the final equation is always the same when debt exceeds real value. The system must rebalance. It can happen through reform or through collapse. The only difference is who acts and who reacts. So the warning to every empire, ancient or modern, remains unchanged. You can't print productivity, you can't borrow trust, and you can't vote your way out of math. From Rome to Britain, from the Soviet Union to this century, history has witnessed the same seven-stage sequence repeat without missing a step. Every empire thought it was immune until it passed stage 5, where trust dissolves and society self-destructs. At that point, collapse is only the inevitable consequence of years of arrogance. But America has not reached that point yet. We are at stage 4, on the fragile line between exhaustion and rebirth. There is still time, not much, but enough to change course. If we dare return to real productivity, financial discipline, and faith in community over faction. The only difference between empires that survive and empires that perish is not in weapons or treasuries, but in the ability to correct course before the equation closes. History doesn't repeat itself. People do. The seven-stage law is real, but the outcome is still in our hands. If we understand it, we can break it. If we look straight at the path that led Rome, Britain, and the Soviet Union to ruin, we can choose a different one, slow down, repair, and begin again. Every empire once thought it was special. Only civilizations that learn from the past truly endure. The pattern is real, but the outcome is still ours to choose. If you want to know where the future is headed, don't look at headlines, don't listen to promises from the campaign podium. Look at the pattern, because it has never lied. If what you've heard makes you see history with new eyes, subscribe to the channel to join me as we dive deeper into the hidden laws behind every empire. See you in the next episode, where we will see the future, rewritten from the very lessons of the past.